So, what would you like to talk about?
Well, I know so little about what happened. I don't even know names, but someone got shot by two other people or something like that after trespassing in a construction site.
Oh yeah. Well, before we get started, is this a conversation you'd like me to not record or record? Do you have a preference in that area?
Oh no, I don't have any preference. I don't mind.
Okay. Well, I'll record it just in case it's good, and you know, publish it if I think it will be helpful for people. So the first thing I want to say on this issue is that I don't have a dog in this fight. There are a lot of people, not a lot of people actually. There's a small minority of vocal people that seem to have a dog in the fight. Like they seem to have something to like that they want to make the facts match their conclusion. My only reason for bringing it up on my Facebook page is because these sort of real-time contemporary situations allow us to sort of fire up the machine of our ethical evaluations and give our principles a test run. And so less important to me is even this actual specific case and more just our ability to use it to test our application of our principles. And so what I mean by that is like if whether or not, let's just pick one of the facts that seems to be disputed constantly. So whether or not when they had the truck in front of the guy that was running, they pointed a gun at him or not. Whether or not that actually happened, whether or not the gun was actually pointed at him or not, I don't care. It seems like the people that do care are concerned about this particular dogfight, and I mean, people can have that argument if they want. Patrick Smith, I'm not interested in that argument. So what I would do is say, okay, well, if he didn't point the gun, how would the ethics work? If he did point the gun, how would the ethics work? Like, I don't care what the what actually happened because I'm not litigating this case personally or whatever. I'm not on the jury, but I do want to use the circumstances to test our ethical understandings. I just wanted to say that up front.
Okay. I hope that it's helpful that I have such a small amount of understanding of what actually happened. I don't know very many facts. I've seen maybe 2 videos of this particular case, but other than that, I don't know a lot. I've seen a lot of people with strong opinions. Most people, I know what most people think happened, and then I know what some people are questioning. So a lot of people say this is cold-blooded murder. I've heard a lot of things beyond that regarding motive. I've also heard people with questions such as, did this individual trespass? If so, what level of force is justified against the trespasser? Other than that, there's fine details that I don't know a whole lot about. And there is some gray area here as well regarding the use of force. And self-defense, I think most people understand that. Perhaps in pursuit of restitution, I think you would lose some more people at that point, but I'm still with that in pursuit of restitution. Reason being, this is assuming there has been some sort of damages done, and if there were, well, that's not really up to me to determine. You don't have to be able to point to something and say, look, this property was destroyed, or look, this property was taken. It could be more than that. For example, and I won't go into much detail at all, but my wife was in the house during a home invasion, and more so than the property stolen in that time is the sense of safety and security and a place that was her child home haven of protection, and that was stolen from her, that sense of security within her lair, so to speak. So as far as was there damages or not from this individual, what appears to be walking on the construction site and walking out possibly multiple times, well, maybe if that were a home that I have put a lot of money toward having built, then potentially once it is built, I may not feel as safe in that home knowing that there are individuals who don't respect property boundaries, who may trespass and look around. That's about as far as I am with this whole thing. So I will need a little bit of catching up to understand some of the more fine details. So I wasn't sure if you would prefer to walk through it step by step based on what you understand happened, or if you might want to take a different approach. I'm gonna go on mute.
Again, I'm gonna say that, like, we can use this situation for all it's worth when we're learning how to apply our principles, right? So we can say if he trespassed, if he didn't trespass, if he trespassed and stole something, if he trespassed and didn't steal something, if he was actually out for a jog, like we can use this for everything it's worth, because that's my only motivation here. Like I'm not trying to be the jury for this real life scenario as these facts develop in the world. Like, this stuff is always messy until like several months later after everything has sort of been solidified. So it's like a big dumpster fire. It's going to be a big dumpster fire for quite a while, especially with these what do you call the militia, the black militia, whatever, showing up there, marching outside of the families of these cops that aren't even in their houses. They're in jail right now, I think. So anyway, just a bunch of virtue signaling. So I guess the best way for me to approach this would be to start like dispelling, or at least correcting people's ethical understandings, common misconceptions that I've seen so far, some bad arguments that I've seen so far, and we can just see where the conversation goes. So one of the most common things that I've seen people say so far that I think is wrong is that trespass is like, some people have even gone so far as to make it sound like it was like a victimless crime. And some people are like non-violent crime, but they use that they use that term in a very sort of open-ended way. Like, the first clarification I would want to say is that if it's trespass, that means it's a violation of the consent of the property owner. That is a victimed crime. That crime has a victim. There are damages, even if all the trespasser did is take up space against the consent of the property owner. That is something that is a damage to that property owner's control of his property, because that's what ownership is. It's the right to exclude others from the use of a thing. So if somebody trespasses, they have by definition sort of stolen some of one's right of ownership over that property. That is a damage. Now, how that works for restitution, I'm really less concerned about. It's probably going to be something, it depends on a myriad of circumstances. And it would be something that you'd want to probably litigate in a free society. And that's another good important thing that I wanted to bring up for this discussion. Like, again, like I'm applying our principles with a free society in mind, not in the current legal context of, laws around vigilante justice and citizens arrest, and with the existence of police, that you would get in trouble for not calling. I'm evaluating everyone involved as equal humans, even though, and I'm even skeptical of the ex-cop involved, because, by virtue of being a cop for 30 some odd years in that area, he knows probably everyone involved in a small town legal system. And so he's got a long list of advantages that would allow him to get away with nefarious things in a circumstance like this. So going into it, I was very skeptical of everybody involved, because one was a long-term ex-retired cop that would have known everyone, and those people, having been friends with him, would very likely, protect him in certain subtle ways that would allow him to get away with things as an ex-cop or as a retired cop. And also, I'm skeptical of all of the actions of the Aubrey guy. I don't even know if I'm saying his name wrong, because the whole thing began with a crime. It began with a trespass. And we found out that it began with many trespasses spanning many months. I think there was a total of 5 that he was on video, like 5 separate videos on separate days where he was trespassing going back to October. So dissecting the ethics of all of this with a bunch of if statements, I think will be really useful. So I think, obviously, if he was just an innocent jogger and didn't even trespass, I think we wouldn't even be having this conversation. I think it's pretty clear. I think it's useful, though, for us to talk through, if he was a trespasser, like a lot of the evidence seems to indicate, what rights does one give up when one trespasses? And I think with a basic understanding of what rights are and how they function, being mutual reciprocal understandings between sentient beings, I think it's a pretty logical equation. Like, it's a math equation at this point, which is the beauty. This is the beauty of objective ethics, is it functions as clearly as a math equation. If one trespasses, one gives up the right to demand others not trespass on their property. Like, that's pretty clear. That's what I posted to Facebook today, which triggered some people. And so I think that might be a good place to start this discussion, is just that simple equation. Like, what rights do you think, Chu, one gives up through trespassing?
Let me think on that for a moment. So if rights are a mutually reciprocal agreement between sentient beings, is that what you said?
Yeah, that's kind of my long-running, working definition of what rights are.
Okay. So if that's what they are, is a mutual agreement between sentient, and it's a reciprocal agreement, the moment a trespass occurs, a violation of that agreement has also occurred. Thus, it's no longer a reciprocal agreement, because one side has violated the agreement. Thus, if you would consider that a contract in a sense, it's no longer a valid contract, or the contract has been violated. I think the expectation that the violator's consent be respected, I'm not sure that's a reasonable expectation anymore. I'll stop there.
I don't know that I like the contract language around it, because there are no contracts, and social contracts are kind of dangerous. But sort of our mutual understanding of rights, and I'm talking about everyone when I say our, not everyone, there's obviously criminals, right? So most people's usage of rights is as a mutual understanding. And that mutual understanding is what elevates us out of sort of the state of animal nature, is our ability to conceptualize what rights are and afford others respect of those understandings and demand the same respect for oneself.
I have a question on that.
Go ahead.
I have a question at that point, in fact. So it would seem like there are certain things that almost everyone, if not everyone, does understand. It is your right to. Most of the time, it's your right not to have things done to you, certain things. A lot of people, it's an obvious shoo-in for rape. So it's your right to choose not to engage in sexual intercourse with someone. And people understand it's wrong to violate someone's decision not to. And they have a word for that. It's rape. I'm not sure that everyone necessarily agrees, though, on what that understanding is. I'll stop there.
Yeah, and certainly a lot of people have a lot of different conceptions of what rights are on the list of the things that are mutually understood, and that's kind of a separate but related discussion. Like, the definition of what rights are is different from the list of rights, and so I kind of begin with the fundamental of defining what a thing called a right is, and then, as you know, like, we as voluntarists would put the non-aggression principle as, front and center on the list of rights to be reciprocated, whereas a lot of other people would have a lot of convoluted, self-contradictory, inconsistent conceptions, like, things like my constitution, my social justice. They have all sorts of things that they want to reciprocate with other people, and that they want everyone to reciprocate with them. But obviously there's a lot of rights that most people don't reciprocate and don't think of as rights. So that's a thing too.
What if we take a step back? So if consent violation were the determining factor in whether a wrong has occurred, are you okay with running with that? You've violated my consent to be interacted with?
No, I don't think that's a good way to I don't
if it's wrong.
I don't have a consent in most actions that people do. I only have consent over my property.
Okay. So would you agree that because your body is your property, one must get consent to give you a hug?
Yeah, if somebody hugged me against my consent, that would, be some, I don't know, you can pick your legal word for it, but it's something akin to assault.
Okay. And if you were to go to, I think it's France, and introduce yourself to someone, maybe Italy, you might get a kiss on both cheeks. This would catch me off guard. I would not be comfortable with this. But it might happen because there's different understanding around what is and is not acceptable.
Right.
That mutual understanding between sentient beings. In this case, it's not a mutual understanding because the expectation that I have was very different than the expectation that they had about what is and is not acceptable, what is and is not considered welcome.
Right. So a good example of a contemporary assumed consent would be the ability for somebody to walk onto my property right now, walk up to my front door and ring the doorbell. Like, they're on my property. They didn't check to see if I consented to that. It's the common sort of societal norms for this area for that to happen. And if I were to start shooting people that were trying to walk up to my door to ring my doorbell, most people would consider that, some sort of egregious crime.
I think that's similar maybe to the example we're discussing, the very particular example that's in the news of the two men who had chased another man down and shot him. Would you agree? It sounds similar.
I don't think so. I think everyone understands what trespass is, and that just because it's easy to walk into a building that's still under construction doesn't mean that it's okay. Especially considering that there's a massive amount of construction site crime and theft that goes on, because there's a lot of very valuable resources, tools, and equipment that are sometimes left on these construction sites, and so they're, sort of fertile ground for burglary.
Okay. I have as an adult, walked around in construction sites before. Granted, I knew the structure, I knew the people that were involved, but I've walked around in there. Could have been mistaken for a trespasser if anyone were a part. It was a church that I was walking in. They were building a church. And people would have recognized who I am, but they might not have. And I think a case could be made that I was trespassing. My question would be, how am I to know whether, well, two things, a question and a statement. The question is, how am I supposed to know whether or not whomever owns that construction site wants me to be there? And number two, how am I to know? Well, no, I'll just stop there. How am I supposed to know if they want me to be in there or if they don't want me to be in there? The statement I wanted to make was going to be relating to. I'm forgetting what the statement was.
With no other context, wouldn't the default assumption be that people don't want you on their property? Like, unless it's an open establishment, like an open business to the public, isn't the default assumption that you don't have any business on their construction site?
That would be the assumption that I would want people to assume. However, there have been instances. Okay, the home invasion at my father-in-law's house, where two people entered a home. I was not there at the time, and my wife was in the house. The door had been left open, but the glass door was closed. And they had opened the glass door and walked in. And apparently what they had said was, we thought it was an open house or something like that. It was. I've heard only a very small amount from this, but while they were certainly lying out of their ass in that moment, I can almost see perhaps a neighbor walking by and thinking, this is an open house. Maybe there's balloons outside and they see a door open and they've seen lots of people coming and going and they think, maybe this is a gathering that it's expected or acceptable for me to be at. Now, how would I approach that? Well, my understanding of what are property rights and my understanding of knowing that I was not invited to this, I don't actually know what was going on. I might ring a doorbell, or I might kind of walk in the driveway and see if I can't see the owner and then walk away if I can't. Because I would want to establish first if I am in fact welcome there. Maybe some people.
Of course you would. Yes.
Well, mostly for my own safety, but almost equally because that's what I would expect people to do for me. Because I've had things where people are coming in and out of my backyard, and I want to know who that is. It's very important to me that I know who it is who has walked on my property beyond the sidewalk. Because I take great pride and care in my lawn, in my flower beds, and my vegetable garden, and the backyard, all these things. And I'm also, there's a certain expectation in my mind of, I guess what I'm thinking is choke points. I don't know how to put it. If someone were to break into my home, there's certain places and there's certain things that I'm expecting. Like, if I hear a bang in this location, I know that I have this amount of time to get to a gun in case I need to defend myself. So if someone trespasses and it's against, or it's without my knowledge, that's a big deal to me. It really is. And like you said, I want to say you made the claim there is no such thing as a victimless consent violation. Did I hear that right earlier on? Or maybe tell me if
basically, yeah.
What you meant. Okay. And I think what I'm getting at here in this example is exactly that. If someone has done anything on my property that was without my knowledge, they didn't seek my consent, that's not okay with me. Suddenly, I'm probably going to go shopping for a motion sensor light. If I caught somebody in my backyard and they're like, "Oh, sorry, I was just curious what kind of trees you had back here," you know, I would. I'm not sure exactly what I would do in that situation. I would perhaps have my hand on a gun, but I might want to get them to leave, and then I would go search for motion sensor light, reinforcement for my fence and gate, a stronger lock for my gate as well. So certainly that is a peace of mind that has been violated, and that's, in my mind, peace of mind is more valuable than thousands of dollars of property stolen. I would much rather have the peace of mind. Not in a false sense, but in the sense of knowing I am in control of my property and others are not going to, and others understand that. And the moment I realize that's not the case, then I can no longer have the expectation that I'm safe here, which I don't in the first place. But okay, I'm probably missing the point here.
Well, most trespass is a pretty minor crime. Like even with the pigs that exist today, like if you're on property and the owner wants you to leave and they call the cops and the cops show up, it's not like they just arrest you. 99% of the time they'll do what's called trespassing you, which means they get your name and information so they can identify you if you do it again, and they make sure that you get the message, don't come back on this property, and they let you go. That's usually the process for trespassing, because it's generally such a minor crime that damages are near to probably non-existent if it's merely a trespass. And I think the only time trespass becomes an actual serious problem is when if somebody's on your property, you say, "Hey, get off my property," and they refuse. Well, now we escalate force. That's when the force happens. But I think this case is a great gray area sort of test case, because if you want to communicate to somebody that they're not supposed to be on the property, that you do consider it a trespass, that they don't have your consent, and if they do it again, you will escalate force, you have to be able to communicate with them. And so it seems natural that people would want to communicate with the trespassers, even ones that are sprinting away because they got caught, revealing mens rea. But if someone trespasses, they have used a portion of your property, they've taken control of that property by standing on it, by using it against your consent. So it seems logical, again, this goes back to the math equation of rights, it seems logical that they then couldn't turn around and say, "Hey, get your hands off of me. You don't have the right to grab my property against my consent," for somebody that was trying to hold them long enough to identify them and communicate the message to them that they don't have the consent to be there and they need to leave. It seems like it would be a performative contradiction for the trespasser to claim his right to not have his body trespassed upon as a defense against somebody trying to hold them long enough to identify and communicate with them the status of their disconsent to them being on the property. I just don't see how that defense could be not logically contradictory. Like, you just finished using someone else's property against their consent. You don't get to then say that no one else gets to use your property against your consent. That's not only is that just illogical on its face, but I mean, that's not how rights work, right? If you're not going to reciprocate the right, the mutual understanding that is rights with other people, they no longer have to reciprocate. They no longer have to afford that understanding to you. And we're basically back to a state of nature. So that's why crime should be dangerous. When you commit a crime, you're removing yourself. You're reducing yourself back to that state of nature, that place outside of ethics.
I'd like to unpack for a moment something I've had in my mind before I go on incorporating it in my thought process here. I want you to understand how I view this, and then maybe we can break that apart a little bit too. So, with regard to using force in self-defense, or perhaps force to seek restitution or to stop an aggressor, send them a message of some sort. The moment someone violates consent, they have taken the equation out of the realm of reason and applied force. We're no longer trying to reason things out and come to a mutual understanding and agreement. Instead, they chose force. And between force and reason, and when I say force, I don't just mean, using force. You can use reason and force at the same time, but I mean consent violation force, violent force, perhaps, initiated force that is unwelcome. The moment someone uses force, they have abandoned reason in favor of force. And when you abandon reason, things that are based in reason go with it. And rights are one of those things. Consent is one of those things. Some people say, oh, rights don't exist. But I think that's only a very narrow way of viewing it. Rights do exist. They are something that exists within our minds. And when you say, I'm no longer going to keep things within the mind, where we're going to work things out, and you use force, you're also saying all those things that go within the realm of reason go out the window. And that's why where you had said just earlier, it would not be reasonable for them to say, hey, stop violating my consent if they just got done violating yours. So that's how you say it. The way I view it is, hey, you just demonstrated to me that reason is something that you have abandoned. And if you're abandoning reason, then your consent doesn't matter to me and my interactions with you. So that's a very dangerous place to be. Now, with me, I don't know. It's probably between you and I. If someone violated me versus violating you, it's a varying level of danger. I don't know. Maybe you would much rather violate my consent than Patrick's consent. But in that moment, when they violate consent, they've abandoned things such as consent. Consent no longer applies to them. Now, one thing I'm not sure about is, does that mean I can pull out a gun and shoot them if consent no longer applies? Or is it like an onion where you peel back a layer? How much consent did they violate? And would it be my responsibility somehow to limit that, such as, well, they weren't aware that they weren't supposed to do something, perhaps. Therefore, I'm not just going to shoot them for violating my consent. Instead, I'm going to try to tell them something, to make it known to them this is not okay. That, in a way, gives me control over my a little more control. I get a little bit more control back by being able to tell that person, no, that's mine. That was not okay. It's not acceptable. You do it again, it's going to cost you. Something like that. You had mentioned something, it would not be unreasonable to run after the person to send them that message, because it's important to let them know that you know what happened and that it's not okay. Question: do you consider the individual who's on the run now, they trespassed and they're running, would you say that they have an obligation to stop and to listen to you? Or perhaps an obligation to not run from you? And I'll end it there.
First of all, your description of consent and how it functions, and I think we basically said the same thing two different ways. So that was really cool. I appreciated that. I think the next distinction that would be useful to talk about is the on the island versus in the city, which is the example I constantly use when I'm differentiating between sort of raw bare metal ethics from first principles and how I think it would be implemented in a free society. In a free society, I would never subscribe to a network of dispute resolution organizations that allowed its members to respond with disproportionate force, because that's just less civilized and less safe in general. And we all, well, not we all, but most people want their children to be reasonably safe, running around in the neighborhood where they might run across somebody's lawn or something like that. So I don't think in any reasonable adult society or network of DROs would disproportionate defensive force be okay. I think that's pretty universal in all human societies that exist now. So I have to expect that would also be a thing then, and it would definitely be something that I would demand or, require from any people I lived around, for sure. And I think there would be a massive market demand for that as well. So maybe I've over-explained that. I just want to make it very clear that I think proportionate defensive force, I think, would definitely be a thing in a free society. And that means that people's responses in these situations would very likely be dictated by their agreements with their DROs, how they handle trespassers and the levels of force that they can use and the circumstances in which they can use them. And I bet it would be a lot more clearly delineated than it is now, with laws that can be interpreted two entirely different ways based on the mood of the prosecutor evaluating the case, as it is now. Like, even if you make a purely defensive, fear for your life shoot here in Texas, that can still, cost you $200,000 and, potentially land you in prison for 20 years. So, people would want a situation in which they could know when and exactly what they could use defensive force and to what degree they could use defensive force. So when talking through this, I want to make it clear that I'm primarily the on the island scenario, absent society, absent normative expectations on DRO agreements for non-proportionate force. Like, when we're on the island and we don't have any of that context, the ethics are pretty raw and visceral and nasty, and no one's ever going to live there. I don't find a lot of value in talking about those. I'm mainly concerned with what I think a free society would look like, or what kind of free society I would choose to live in would look like. I don't. If I can run alongside someone and follow them, even if they've committed no crime and they're just a random person on quote unquote public property, then I can certainly do that to somebody that's fleeing the scene of a crime. I don't think that is in question. Now, a lot of people are having issue with the fact that these guys followed them instead of just calling the police and staying in their house, I guess. I think that's kind of dumb. Another thing that is a big distinction from this story is that, we as voluntarists make no distinction between any of the humans involved in this situation and active police. Like, they're all humans. The police can do nothing that the normal humans can't do, and the normal humans can do no more than somebody wearing a blue uniform and a badge could do. And so that's another thing, is like, most of the people discussing the story are more normie types, and there's this very strong sort of expectation that a non-cop will do nothing more than maybe follow at a very, remote distance with no weapons or anything like that, and just stay in your car a long way away and then call the cops and wait for the cops to arrive. And if you do anything more than that, then you're the problem. Even though when the cops that they call show up, the cops are going to do way more than that, right? Like, when the cops show up, they are going to forcibly detain this guy on pain of death if he chooses to continue, escalating or running or fleeing or whatever, right? They're going to escalate until he's either in cuffs or dead. And So anyway, that's a contradiction that I guess normies have in this situation that doesn't really apply to our discussion here.
Well, I mean, I appreciate you bringing it up. It actually reminds me. So after the home invasion that my wife experienced, this happened within a 6-minute span. I walked out of the house, walked my dog just around the block, but with my father-in-law and his girlfriend. By the time we got around the block and to the house, I saw my wife running at me, saying, "We've been robbed. We've been robbed. We've been robbed." And the first thing that we did, I'm thinking about this. I totally forgot that we did this. My father-in-law got in his vehicle. I had my gun on my side. Now, I was not chasing him down with my gun out or anything, but I had it as a tool of self-defense. And we were driving around the neighborhood. We were driving at all the key points where my father-in-law knew someone would likely run with stolen items. So it was a similar thing. 2 males in a vehicle pursuing someone who had just burgled their house. One with a gun. I guess in this case, it was only one. In that case, sounds like both of them had a gun, perhaps. Now, did we ever find him? Well, yes, but it wasn't from that chase. I actually found them later that night under a streetlight. But had we found this individual, I can see myself running at them. If they stopped and faced me, I would stop the moment I saw them stop. I'm going in my mind what I think would happen, but it's very different when the adrenaline is running. So I can't guarantee what would happen in this moment. But I could see myself on foot if my vehicle could not get there, also running out because I would want to find who this person is. Number one, they had a laptop, an iPad, and 2 purses full of cell phones, credit cards, etc. So there was a lot of value involved there, and there's a lot of cost. Automatically from the very beginning, this is going to cost because we'd have to reset all of our credit cards, and we'd have to take the time to figure out what was even lost. That was one of the really scary things. We didn't even know what all was lost because we weren't quite sure what all they had taken. So I would have gone to great lengths to identify this individual. Do I know what would have happened? What would I have done? I don't know. And maybe this highlights some of the things I should be putting some more thought into so that I don't go into it and try to figure this out within a 5-second moment. You know, what do I do? Oh my gosh, here's the person who my wife got out of the bathroom and was face to face with a man who had a hoodie pulled over his face, in her home, in her childhood home. What would I do? I don't know, but it is a similar situation. So I can understand wanting to chase after someone because that was my natural instinct in that moment was let's find this son of a bitch, whoever this is, who just stole. It wasn't about the cards. It was they were in our house and they were not supposed to be in our house. This was a surprise. My wife and my wife's grandmother was also in that house, and they were walking around behind her. She couldn't hear anything, but they were walking around behind her. She never understood what happened. We tried to tell her, she never understood. So anyway, I say that only to say I can empathize with the people. Now, again, I don't know anything about what happened, and all I'm saying that I empathize with is the natural instinct to try to catch the person who was just in your home. And the reason I say that also is because of what you said. I agree. There is no difference between someone who has a shiny badge and someone who doesn't have a shiny badge. It's a shiny badge. It's a fancy uniform or a fancy costume. And really the only thing that is different there is kind of people's perceptions. But those are just perceptions of reality. And the reality is the cop has no more rights than I do. What's wrong for the cop is wrong for me and vice versa. So anyway, as far as chasing the person down, I don't see that as... It's not surprising to me because I've done it myself. I didn't shoot anyone, by the way.
Another easy way to see people's strange upside down thinking on this issue is that most people, normies included even, fully expect a police officer to be able to detain somebody that is suspected of a crime. Fully. Like even a lot of anarchists that would make sense to. We expect to be able to detain people that are suspected of crimes, and that's even a lower burden of proof than I think this Aubrey situation was. But I think my facts are a couple days out of date on it, so I don't want to spend too much time trying to address this specific one. I just want to again, I've already said this. I just want to use it as an excuse to test out my application of principle. So the disconnect for a lot of people, especially the normies, is between the shiny badge and the not shiny badge. Like it would be perfectly fine for a shiny badge to detain somebody even merely suspected of a crime. But for a person without a shiny badge, gasps, shock, and awe, the murderers, like, what were they even doing getting out of their car? Whereas the cop would have, chased the guy down and escalated force until he was either detained or dead. One scenario they would have been perfectly fine with, and the other they're, hurling accusations of premeditated murder. So what's next in this discussion? Another useful point that came out of it was, the guys chasing him down weren't the property owners. They weren't the victims of the trespass. So they had no right to even attempt to detain this guy. Again, I think that is a misapplication of of ethics, of our principles. So when a person communicates by action that he is no longer reciprocating rights, there is no sort of onus on me or anyone else to continue reciprocating rights and affording him the altruistic good intention of affording them rights and respect, just because the person whose consent he violated wasn't me specifically. And to take it one step further, it's made obvious why this is a contradiction when we talk about coming to the defense of other people in other situations besides trespass. So if you, I won't say your name unless you want me to on recording, but
I don't mind.
If you, Chu, were being attacked, I wouldn't walk up, look at that scenario, and be like, well, I can't do anything to his attacker because, he's not attacking me. What? No, like when a person signals with their actions that they stop reciprocating rights and they remove themselves from sort of the land of ethics and reduce themselves to the state of nature, I don't have any onus at all to continue respecting this guy's rights. In fact, you would hope that I would not continue respecting this guy's rights and defend you against him. So in this case, I don't think, to be consistent, which is key for logic and ethics, we can't hold trespass as some sort of specialized crime, in which case, everyone has to continue respecting this guy's rights, even though, except for the one person or property owner that, whose consent he violated. I think proportionate response is still a big part of it, right? So, and again, I think this is kind of...
Why is proportionate response important?
Again, I think that's something that I would certainly demand in any area I lived in and from any DRO company network that I was a member of. And I think the vast majority of other people would have a market demand for that as well. Would you not?
What would be a proportionate response to, for example, trespassing?
That's a cool discussion, right? So, and I think I kind of went over that earlier. So if somebody is going to use my property against my consent, then I should at least, let's just spitball restitution. What would restitution for trespass look like? Do I want dollars? That doesn't really make sense. Like, maybe all I want is to use your property for a minute. And how could you deny me that? And what I mean by that is what that would probably look like is just me controlling your property long enough to figure out who you are and communicate to you to stay off my property, at least in the beginning. I think that's a perfectly symmetrical, proportionate response. You just used my property against my consent, and now I'm going to use yours, for a short time, and now I'm going to use your property against your consent for a short time.
Okay, so if they were to kick in the door of your home and walk in, and then suddenly they're surprised at your home, they run out, you chase them down, you figure out which house they're in, and let's say they're in there. Or even if you don't know they're in there, you kick their door down. That would be reasonable. I would agree with that if that's what you're saying. And
tactically, that sounds incredibly dangerous. I would not do that.
Oh yes. What I mean is just, let's assume that they're just running, and like if you did it, yes, it would be dangerous, ill-advised, because you are at a tactical disadvantage beyond your wildest dreams.
This brings up another interesting point to talk about. So let's take that as a situation, just totally absent of Aubrey and this entire bullshit. Let's just run with your scenario. Guy kicks down your door, you chase him, you follow him back to a house, kick in that door to try and identify who he is, and well, in this case, kicking down your doors is not just a trespass. That's an actual damage, and I say an actual damage. That's not what I mean. I mean that's like a higher level of damage than a mere trespass. What is important for the ethics of the situation is what is actually true. And so what I mean by that is, this guy kicks down your door, you chase him down the street, and he runs inside of a house, and you run up to the house and kick the door down looking for him. Well, you thought that was his house. But if it turns out it wasn't his house or his property, well, you just violated the consent and damaged the property of somebody else that you didn't have the right to do. And what's important in that situation is not what you thought. It's not what your intent was. It's what you did, what the actual result of your actions in the world was. So that's something else I think your example just brought up that is kind of important to this case, because a lot of people are saying, well, and I don't know if this is true with the Aubrey thing, because I'm a little out of date on the story, but like I said, it doesn't matter because we're just using it as an example to test our application of ethics and principle. But a lot of people are saying that the Mick guys, I don't even know their names, Mick something or others, the pursuing guys didn't know for sure that this was the guy that was trespassing. And I don't even want to get into the details of why that may or may not be true. Again, I don't have a dog in this particular fight. I'm just using it to practice.
Okay, yeah. So let's say let's go with that then. They don't really know if it was him. It's just that they suspect it was.
Right. And so they suspect it was in the same way you suspected that house you chased that guy into belonged to that guy. And if it turned out to be right, it was his house, then you've sort of achieved restitution, or at least reciprocity in terms of proportionate response by kicking down his door. If it turned out not to be his house, then now you owe restitution to somebody else, And so the same situation for this. I'm putting ifs on all this because the reality is unimportant for our practice session. And I'm going to keep saying that because I know this video is going to be taken out of context. If they merely had suspicion and not confirmation that this was the guy that trespassed, and if they turned out to be right, no harm, no foul. If they turned out to be wrong, well, now they have, trespassed on an innocent person's property and would owe restitution for that by trying to detain an innocent person or a peaceful person.
Can I ask about a third scenario?
Sure.
Let's say they were in the house when you chased them down, but it was their buddy's house, and their buddy's not okay. Their buddy doesn't know what happened. They just see their buddy ran in. I need to get in your house now. Someone's after me. That person sees them, and they kick in. Let's say I'm their buddy. They kick in my door. I pull a gun. I shoot. something like that. Is it any different? Maybe I'm complicating things too much, but it doesn't seem too unreasonable. If someone's in a neighborhood, they may want to be in that neighborhood because they know they have a buddy nearby that they can run to. So would it be on the person who's pursuing, so the person who's trying to catch the person they caught trespassing, would it be wrong for them to kick in my door? Even if the trespasser truly is there in my home? It's my castle. What do you think on that? What do you think about that?
I'm a little unclear on the specifics. We've gone like 3 levels deep of this example.
So okay.
So let me just say some generalities, and then you can tell me if they apply. So, if the friend's house that they run to, it turns out that they're protecting them, well, then they've just become sort of co-conspirators to the crime. So they would lose the defense that, oh, hey, that guy can't kick down my door, even though I'm protecting the guy that just kicked down his door. Well, that's a non sequitur, right? That's a contradiction. You can't assist somebody in doing something and then complain when somebody does it to you.
Maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't know what happened. That guy runs in. People are after me. I need to hide. If a friend of mine came banging on the door, there's people after me. I need your help. I need to hide. If it's someone that I trust,
yeah,
then I would be like, okay, here's a couple guns for you. Here's a couple guns for me. You watch over here. I'll watch over there.
Yeah.
Here's some of your points where you need to not shoot a gun because you're going to go through the neighbor's home, etc. And, we would go from there. But if the person pursuing them is doing so with just cause, I don't know. Am I assisting a trespasser? Yeah, but I didn't know that. I mean, does it matter? I'm thinking probably there's more information in this than really matters if we're really trying to get down to the principle of the thing. But it is very complicated and it's sort of similar. This is someone, I guess, maybe, I don't know, does this Aubrey guy live in this neighborhood? I don't know at all. I'm not really sure if there is a confusion in.
So this is why violence is so rarely used in a society that doesn't have a system that protects the use of it, because it's so messy and it's so unpredictable. And that's why we both agreed immediately, and we even laughed about it in the beginning of this scenario because of how tactically unwise it would be to break down the door of some house we're not familiar with that a criminal we were just chasing ran into. Not only would it be tactically unwise for a long list of reasons, but it would be ethically unwise too, because you don't know the scenario. You don't know you don't know anywhere near enough variables of the ownership of that property, the status of collusion between that property owner and the person that ran inside. You don't know anything. And so if you just barged into that situation, that it might shake out very bad for you. You might become the aggressor. And so I think most reasonable people don't turn to violence for this first, second, third, or even 10th option usually, because of how messy and unpredictable it is.
Wow. I'm glad we're having this conversation now again, instead of me trying to figure all this out in the moment. I wonder how many people don't ever think about it. I'm one of them. Well, obviously now I am. Okay. I agree. You have insufficient knowledge. It's similar to the guy walking down in the neighborhood, and they don't know if this is an open house block party going on at a home or not. You don't know. You're taking a risk by choosing even to step on there and peek. Maybe you walk in the driveway and kind of peek in the gate to the back. You're taking a risk. You are. So I doubt they're gonna.
Let's bring this all the way to a free society, because we're coming up on an hour, and this is probably a great stopping point, this as a final point. And if you want to continue or have other stuff, let's do a part 2, because you're great to talk to. This is productive. So in a free society, the guy's sprinting away from the place he just trespassed on would be privately owned. And so the rules of chasing this guy would be dictated by the owner of the road, and there would already be knowledge and probably an agreement on how that stuff is supposed to be handled on this road owner's property that this guy was running down. It would probably begin with a phone call to the road owner to be like, "Hey, you got a trespasser run down your road. Do you want me to follow him, or do you have people that are going to do it?" Something like that. There's going to be an explicit agreement on how that's going to be handled on this private property that can be followed. So this whole situation becomes vastly less muddy because the public space this guy's running down is actually private, and there's rules in place that are probably ubiquitously known to all involved in this situation. And I think that's a big difference.
Yeah, and I guess to expound on that, I've thought about this ever since I made the decision to make calling the police an absolute last resort. I'm not saying I would never call the police, but it'd be probably for medical assistance or something. Ever since I made that decision, I started to realize my safety and protection and my ability to respond, it's all on me. If someone breaks into my home, I'm not immediately calling the police. That's not my first decision because, frankly, I don't think that makes me any better off having them show up in an unknown situation. I just don't trust them. Ever since I made that decision, though, I came to realize, well, this is all up to me. So I realized, maybe I could install a longer steel screws into my doors, in the entry doors of my home, so that it takes 5 kicks to kick that door in instead of 1 or 2. And I did. Maybe I should put a lock on my gate. Maybe I should put some motion sensor lights at my home. Maybe I should look into the vulnerabilities on my garage door so people can't break into that. By the way, most garage doors are very easily broken into. Look into it. There's videos online. All these things were things I'd never really thought of before, because in my head, I guess, even though I had known I don't support the police by that point, I had still kind of thought I would still call them, because what other options do I have? And again, I'm not saying I would never call them, but there aren't a lot of options. But in a free society where that's not even an option, where there's no guaranteed person you can call, instead it's on your shoulders. Well, you may employ some outside. It would be probable that you would have an outside third party that you could call. But at the same time, this is your land. This is your space. It's on you. There's no facade of expectations that someone else is going to come and solve your problems for you. A lot of people think that's going to happen with the police today, and they're sorely disappointed when the crime does not get solved.
The only counterpoint I would like to offer to that is, because I do hear that a lot, like, I will never call the police,
Oh, and by the way, I'm not saying never. Okay. I'm not saying never.
So that was a straw man. I mean, like, I will be very unlikely to call the police, everything you were just saying. I think the most reasoned way to look at it is you have 2 threats. You have a threat from the immediate break-in trespasser, potential burglar, and you have a different rubric of you have a different threat model for the Blue Line gang members. And part of the Blue Line gang member threat model is they might come abduct you and throw you in a cage if you don't call them under specific circumstances. So it's like you need to sort of juggle the 2 threats as reasonably as you can, such that you remain alive and free. You handle the burglar X, Y, and Z, and you handle the Blue Line gang A, B, C. And you need to play both of these games and not just avoid blanketly calling the cops under most circumstances. You need to take a reasoned approach and figure out when you have to keep yourself free, because they're a threat too, I guess, is what I would say to do.
By the way, there's an interesting film on Netflix about a similar scenario. It's about a survivalist group. Anyway, they killed someone, and then they had to decide, do we call the police or not? Well, if we call the police, and it was an accident, someone died at the survivalist camp. It was an accident. They said, do we call the police or not? And they said, well, look at us. We're here with these guns, with all this food and like a barracks like setup, and we clearly they didn't die in a hunting accident. It was like a landmine that they stepped on or something. So it was a very strange dispute, but it all started from what you're talking about, the other realm that you're trying to navigate, that is the threat of the state. So in that case, I've thought through this a lot. It's actually a terrifying tightrope to walk for me. I've thought about it. I thought if someone breaks into my home, I would not hesitate to shoot them. If if it was looked like an elderly woman with dementia, that would be different. I'd want to identify my target. But if it was clearly someone who, in that moment, it registers this is potentially a threat and they're coming at me, I would not hesitate to shoot them. But in that moment, I've asked myself, well, would I call the police? Yes, I would call the police at that time. I would be careful about what exactly I tell them. I would not say I shot anyone. I would say someone has been shot. Shots have been fired. Please send someone fast or something. Uh-oh. Did I lose you?
No, I'm here. And you just reminded me of another important point of the story that I wanted to talk about. So if you're good, I'm good. I'm good to go like maybe 10 or 15 more minutes on it.
Yeah, that's fine.
So it was forced restitution. That's what it was. So if it's a burglary, or if it's a, I don't know, rape, murder, they steal your car, something like that, in any other crime, the thief owes you restitution. Usually 2x the value of whatever they stole. And the logic was really interesting behind this. It was in Walter Block had it in his Defending the Undefendable 2 book. It was really cool. The audiobook will be out soon. And the logic behind the 2x restitution for a thief was the 1x is you getting your stuff back. The 2x is you doing to the thief what he did to you. And if it's just the 1x, then the thief has no... there's no downside to thieving, because if he gets caught, all he has to do is return it, and he can try again tomorrow. If it's 2x, well, thieving is costly, and there's a risk involved. If he gets caught, well, he's way worse off than he started. And I think that's a good way to look at other stuff. So if a thief steals something from you, you have the absolute property right to use an escalating to infinity amount of force to retrieve your stolen property. Until restitution is made, you can use an escalating amount of force until you get restitution. And I think that's an important principle for all crimes. Until restitution is made, you can escalate force until the situation is sort of satisfied. And so if in a situation of trespass, which is a low damage crime, the restitution amount is, like I said earlier, I think a proportionate restitution amount for a trespass is a trespass in the other direction, in the form of holding a guy long enough to identify him and tell him not to come on your property again. If he resists that restitution, it makes sense to me that you can, just like with any other crime, escalate force until you're able to achieve that restitution. What are your thoughts on that?
I would need some time to digest it. It sounds reasonable. It would be something I may agree to. As far as, is that the exact amount that it ought to be? I'm inclined to say that's up to the injured party and the aggressor to determine.
I didn't say they must escalate. I said that you could.
Okay.
I said you could choose to, I guess is what I mean. Like if somebody steals your car, you could choose to let it go because maybe it's risky, or maybe, I don't know what your motivations would be for letting somebody steal your car and not doing anything about it. But what I was saying is that if you chose to, you could escalate as much force as you needed to get your car back. And most people understand that for any crime outside of trespass. For some reason, trespass is seen as sort of like this crime with no damage involved, which is absolutely false. It's a consent violation. It's a property violation, and it can be restituted just like other crimes.
I agree with you there, and it does sound. It sounds reasonable. I'd need to think on this a little bit more. I guess that might be a good part too. Would be determining restitution or obstacles between you acquiring restitution. What can and can't you do?
I think the important way to continue to look at it is based on the fundamental understanding of ethics, and not ask like what can they do. It's what can the trespasser demand not be done to him. I mean, certainly he can demand, based on obvious proportionate response like logic, that he can't be murdered for a trespass. I guess that would be the equivalent of like erasing someone's property. Like if I walked up and instead of trespassing somehow erased your property from existence, then maybe the proportionate response to that is erasing your body property. I don't know, but that's certainly not what we're talking about with trespassing.
Well, in this, maybe part two we pick up not just in restitution, but talking more specifically about this case. Maybe I need to get some more up-to-date facts on the Aubrey situation so that I can know what happened there. Because I've heard a few stories. I've heard this described in different ways. Some of those stories do sound like trespassing occurred and killing the trespasser was the restitution or something like that. Or some would say they murdered him for trespassing. I don't know. Like, I don't know what happened. I don't know if there was a murder. I don't know if there was some sort of... I don't know. I'm sure that there's more information out there that I haven't seen. Mine's very limited what I've had. I've seen very limited information. So maybe that would be a good part too, would be maybe we get caught up on our facts and then we can discuss and make sure we're on the same page with our facts.
Well, there's the video. There's like 2 or 3 videos that contain, I think, enough facts to figure it out. Luckily, like it's not just a he said she said. Like and I won't tell you what happens in the videos because I don't want to sort of like predispose you to my interpretation of what happens. But one shows the property in question, and another video shows. I would say like 70% of the altercation right before the shooting. So maybe look at those, see if it brings up any questions in your mind, and if it's worthy of another conversation, we'll do a part 2. I appreciate your time, Chu.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I'd appreciate your time as well.